3 books, 1 journey, 1,000 emotions. Ever wonder why trilogies have become the gold standard for fantasy stories? From J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary Lord of the Rings to more modern masterpieces like the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. There's something so satisfying about a fantasy series told in 3 parts. And today we're diving deep into why 3 is the magic number, because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in fantasy, science fiction, and horror. I've been thinking about this because I've just finished Mark Lawrence's Library Trilogy, which I thought was so satisfying for a number of reasons, but one of them was the sense of satisfaction that the entire story arc concluded in 3 books or 3 parts. So it got me wondering, why do I find trilogies so satisfying? Maybe because storytelling loves patterns, and the trilogy structure fits storytelling because of the power of 3. Book 1 sets the stage, it introduces us to the world, the stakes, the characters. Book 2, the infamous middle child, deepens the conflict, explores deeper themes, and often ends on a cliffhanger. And Book 3, that's where it all comes together. The climax, the payoff, the emotional punch that lingers long after the final page. It's storytelling alchemy. It mirrors our own journeys, beginning, trials, and resolutions. And let's be real, fantasy fans love a sprawling epic, but there's a thin line between immersive and overwhelming. I mean, do you really want to commit to a 14-book saga where you need a spreadsheet to remember who's who? It's no secret that I love the Wheel of Time series, but I also read them as they were published in the early 90s, and this was a series we talked about as friends. We couldn't wait for the next one to come out. It was an event, but reading 14 books over a 20-year period is a lot different than plopping 14 books in front of someone and saying, read it. When you have a big series like that, it just can be so overwhelming because it's a commitment and it's not for everyone. For example, I started way late on the Malison books by Stephen Erickson, and I think they are brilliant, but I never finished the series. I got over halfway through and I found the series got too dense for me and I never finished. Think about this. If you've read the Stormlight Archives, you probably read them like I did as they were published, and even reading them that way as they're published was a big commitment. Now, think of how you'd react if someone gave you all 5 of them at once, all 5,000 plus pages. I'm just saying. There are exceptions, of course. There are lots of duologies and quartets that I like, but for me, the trilogy hits a sweet spot. It gives just enough time for world building, character arcs, and lore without dragging or losing momentum. Think about the law of 3s: beginning, middle, end, life, death, rebirth, past, present, future, heroes, mentors, villains, maiden, mother, crone. 3s are universal. One thing that's great about a trilogy is you'll get a resolution, and most readers crave a resolution. At least I know I do. We invest deeply in these worlds, and we want the final moment where it all clicks into place. A trilogy respects the reader's time and their emotional journey. I think there was a rumor, and I think I even believe this, that we were trained to see fantasy series and trilogies because of Tolkien. But the more I read, the more I think that's wrong. The more I think that Tolkien just stumbled upon the perfect number of books for a series. the Earthsea Trilogy by Ursula K. Le Guin, His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, Hunger Games Trilogy by Suzanne Collins, Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang, the Lycanius Trilogy by James Islington. It goes on and on. At the end of the day, the trilogy isn't just a format, it's a promise of adventure, depth, and closure. And in a world that's constantly expanding, sometimes 3 books is exactly what you need to tell a timeless tale. You know who's a genius about this? One of my all time favorite fantasy writers, Robin Hobb. Her Elderling books are broken into multiple trilogies, except for one. There's a 4 book set, a quartet, The Rain Wild Chronicles, and it's almost universally considered the weakest of the Elderling books. Now, I started thinking about all this because of a trilogy that I just finished, and I just loved it. And if there's one recent trilogy that proves the power of 3, it's the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. This is a master class in trilogies, and it breaks away from many traditional fantasy tropes, which, in my opinion, is a feature, not a bug. It blends fantasy with metaphysics, ancient secrets, maybe a touch of other speculative genres. This trilogy is a case study in just how deeply a 3 part structure can enhance a fantasy narrative. I picked the first book, The Book That Wouldn't Burn, because of the cover. For Shove It or Shove It, it became my book of the year. I thought the prose was razor sharp, and the plot was really complex, and the whole story was layered with really intense world building. But what makes the Library Trilogy such a perfect example of a trilogy format? Let's turn the page. The first book in a trilogy must hook you, but not just with plot. It has to introduce themes, rules, mysteries you're dying to unravel, and of course, characters. In The Book That Wouldn't Burn, we first meet Lyvira, and this starts off like a very typical fantasy with basically a farm girl whose home is destroyed by monstrous orcs, and then she finds herself a stranger in a strange land when she ends up in this city that houses a fantastical library that maybe spans time and other worlds. And she is set on a path to become a librarian in this magical place, complete with a Gandalfian mentor named Ute. Is Gandalfian a word? Now it is. Then we meet the second protagonist, a man named Evar, who, along with his 4 siblings, have been raised in a locked room in the library since they were children. Also, throw in a little nod to Narnia, specifically The Magician's Apprentice, if you know, you know. This isn't just a story about books, it's about the weight of knowledge, the warping of truth, and the cycles of memory and time. Lawrence establishes a world that feels both ancient and futuristic, familiar and strange, and by the end of book 1, you're not just hooked, you're haunted. Then we come to the second book, The Book That Broke the World. Second books in a trilogy must complicate things, and Lawrence takes that challenge head on. Book 2 breaks more than the world, it breaks you, or at least it breaks the characters you've come to love. Now, there is a major new character introduced, a woman named Silcha, who is kind of from this Ewok race of people. I never really connected with her. I mostly wanted to know what was going on with Lyvira and Evar, and eventually we do. We mostly jump around between 4 points of view: Selcha, Lyvira, Evar, and one more character, Arpix, another librarian who gets his own chapters. And then we come to the final book, the book that held her heart. Everything from the first 2 books clicks into place. It's not just an ending, it's a reframing of the entire trilogy. One thing that threw me is there's suddenly a ton of point of view characters, including a brand new character named Anne, who is really special and has a very unusual story arc. Now, there are a lot of point of view characters, and they hop around from chapter to chapter. Sometimes I get annoyed when a book does that because Invariably, I jump to a storyline that I'm not that interested in. I want to keep following someone else's storyline. But in this last book, somehow I didn't feel that way because all the storylines were so interesting and fascinating. I devoured this book. This is the emotional catharsis that trilogies are built for. All the confusion, the pain, the questioning, it blossoms into a resolution. The trilogy structure lets Lawrence control the pacing like a master conductor. The first book inspires awe, the second stirs doubt, the third brings clarity without ever spoon feeding you answers. It's not just about what happens, it's about how you feel by the end. And you may feel changed or enlightened or maybe heartbroken. If there's any criticism I have for this trilogy, and this may sound strange, but the plot is just so dang convoluted and complicated. Usually in a good way, but sometimes I got a little bit lost and had to go back or play catch up. The Library Trilogy is one of those trilogies, at least for me, that breaks the traditional fantasy mold, like The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang, with an anti-hero main character, like The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, with a fantasy world set in the 20th century, like the Lycanius Trilogy by James Islington, which messes with your mind with timelines and time travel. If you haven't read the Library Trilogy yet, prepare to lose sleep. Prepare to have your mind blown and prepare for a trilogy you won't forget. So, do you agree with me that a trilogy is the perfect number of books for a fantasy series? And what's your favorite fantasy trilogy? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be